of the 2010 Cal Green Code. Before we begin, I just want to thank the panelists, Dave Walls and Kim Strange and Doug Hensel. I personally want to thank for all the work that you've done on Greywater and the implementation of SB 1258, which moves us, it won't be the subject of today's hearing, but it is something that this chair is very, very thankful and grateful to. So we're going to begin today's hearing, and I'm going to make a few opening remarks and on green building standards, and hopefully more members will show up as we move forward. As part of the Senate, we are this year going to be doing more oversight hearings. And today, the legislature has definitely, today's hearing, oversight on green building standards on the progress report. I'd like to say that the legislature has shown a strong interest in promoting green building standards over the last 3 years. This committee, the Senate Transportation and Housing Committee, has seen an unprecedented number of bills promoting and supporting green building standards. But however, even though the legislature, we've seen this unprecedented growth, for the most part, the adoption and substances of green building standards have been handled administratively through existing building standards processes. This process reached a new milestone in January of this year when the Building Standards Commission approved the 2010 California Green Building Code, known as the Cal Green Code. Given the legislature's interest in this subject and the administrative nature of the process, the committee is now interested in receiving an update on the results. The purpose of this hearing is to receive and to hear a presentation on the substance of the 2010 Cal Green Code and to hear feedback on any and all outstanding issues and to listen and have input from all interested parties. We have a number of presenters today. We have 3 at our panel. First, Dave Walls from the California Building Standards Commission, and also Kim Strange and Doug Hensel, Department of Housing and Community Development Codes and Standards Division. So with that, I have some questions, but I'll let you make your presentation and how pleased we are to have you. And let's begin with this hearing.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman Lowenthal and committee members. My name is Dave Walls. I'm the Executive Director of the California Building Standards Commission. I want to thank you for inviting us here today to talk to you regarding our recent adoption of the California Green Building Standards Code. I would like to start with some background information on the development of the code. In early 2007, the administration asked the California Building Standards Commission to initiate a process to develop green building standards. Together with the Department of Housing and Community Development, we developed a plan to accomplish that goal. In October of that year, the governor provided further direction to CBSE to work with specified state agencies on the adoption of green building standards for residential, commercial, and public buildings for the 2010 code adoption process. As a result, the California Building Standards Commission established the development of the first statewide Green Building Standards Code as a priority. To begin the process, CBSE and ACD reviewed existing green building standards, best practices, guidelines, and other published material in the development of these proposed green building standards. The goal was to develop a building code that incorporated in part green building measures that were common to the industry rather than reinvent the wheel. An important part of the process toward accomplishing the goal was to establish a focus group composed of representatives from various environmental groups, the building industry, code enforcement agencies, and interested parties. State agencies collaborated with members of the focus group and their respective advisory boards. Information gathered during these meetings provided the impetus behind the initial development and adoption of the 2008 Voluntary Base Code. The initial code was successful in providing the framework and meaningful first step to establish a statewide green building standards code that could be evaluated and built upon in the development of future versions of the code. The benefit of the optional or voluntary approach was to allow industry and enforcement agencies to prepare for and adjust to the proposed green building standards before they became mandatory, therefore greatly increasing the chances of a high level of compliance. The code has been well received and even been adopted as mandatory by several jurisdictions around California. As a result, we have received very important feedback from the industry, the enforcement community, and other stakeholders. In January of this year, the new code with mandatory regulations that will achieve significant impacts in greenhouse gas emission, energy consumption, and water conservation provisions were adopted by the California Building Standards Commission into the 2010 California Green Building Standards Code, also known as CalGreen. California will now require each new building to reduce their water consumption, utilize building commissioning to increase building systems efficiencies, divert construction waste from landfills, and to install low pollutant emitting materials. These provisions establish a minimum of green construction practices and incorporate environmentally responsible buildings into the everyday fabric of California. For the 2010 adoption, the state agencies again followed the very successful code development process that allowed input from a cross-section of stakeholders, subject matter experts, and the expertise of state agencies such as the Air Resources Board, Department of General Services, Integrated Waste Management Board, Department of Water Resources, California Energy Commission, and others in the development of the CalGreen Code. The code has approximately 52 mandatory measures and an additional 130 measures that have been placed in the appendix for optional use. In addition, the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development adopts as voluntary for hospitals a good portion of the California Energy Code from which it is currently exempt. Some key mandatory measures for commercial occupancies include specified parking for clean air vehicles, 20% reduction in potable water use within buildings, 50% construction waste diversion from landfills, use of building materials that emit low volatile organic compounds, and building commissioning. Some key optional measures include cool roofs, prescriptive energy measures, increased reduction in landscape potable water irrigation, and building flush out prior to occupancy. Another key component is a two-tiered system designed to allow jurisdictions that wish to adopt codes that go beyond the state mandatory provisions to do so. The tiers include increased reductions in energy usage by 15 or 30%, increased reduction in potable water use, additional parking for clean air vehicles, the cool roofs, additional construction waste conversion, use of recycled materials, and increased use of low-emitting resilient flooring and thermal insulation. The code addresses the very important issue of verification by utilizing the already existing building code enforcement infrastructure. Public agencies will incorporate the CalGreen Code provisions into their construction field inspections. Like California's existing building code provisions that regulate all constructions throughout the state, the mandatory CalGreen Code provisions will be inspected and verified by local building departments. The tiers are designed to become mandatory when adopted by a jurisdiction and then becomes part of the local building department's inspection process. California building officials are some of the finest professionals in public service. They not only enforce highly technical health and safety standards, but they enforce accessibility standards, energy standards, and typically assist in the inspections of public works and local planning requirements. In an effort to assist with the implementation of CalGreen, CBSE is taking advantage of training opportunities, developing education and training material, and working to partner with organizations that have existing education and training programs. The CalGreen Code is currently available online and is in the process of being published along with the rest of Title 24, California Building Standards Code, that was recently adopted. The effective date of the 2010 California Building Standards Code is January 1, 2011. Looking to the future, CalGreen will be developed using the same open and transparent process that has proven successful thus far. We look forward to the opportunity to engage in continued discussions with our stakeholders to modify, enhance, and expand the code to provide additional environmental benefit. Additionally, we are aware of model codes and standards that have recently been developed or are currently being developed by codes and standards organizations. Each of these codes or standards is designed to be adopted by enforcement agencies and utilize the same local enforcement verification process included in CalGreen. CBSE will review each of these documents as they become available and consider their application in California. The provisions of the California Green Building Standards Code set a sensible minimum that all new structures can meet to significantly minimize the state's overall carbon output. It's also important to emphasize that each local jurisdiction retains the administrative authority to go beyond the CalGreen minimum standards. Finally, this was an incredible team effort, and all that participated deserve credit for the success of the CalGreen Code. The provisions of the new code are attainable and realistic and based on good practices. The Commission worked closely with the building industry and other stakeholders to ensure that the mandatory regulations achieve a balance between providing significant environmental standards and cost-effective practices that will not drive up construction costs in a slow economy. The code is not perfect, as very few codes or documents are in their early editions. However, I believe this code is an important step in mainstreaming green building design and a huge step toward the reduction in the carbon footprint buildings have on the environment in California. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walls. First, I'd like to introduce and welcome Vice Chair Senator Huff. Is there anything you'd like to say? Thank you. And also, Senator Pavley, welcome to the committee. Would you like any? Well, I have a couple of questions that I just need to I'd like to understand more as we move in this, and again, to compliment you for all the work and moving forward with the new Cal Green Code. First thing, you mentioned the different tiers, Tier 1, Tier 2, and I'd like to understand more about how these tiers work. For example, are they something that any developer could use voluntarily throughout the state and then market the building as a Cal Green building, or are the tiers only applicable in a city that has made the tiers mandatory within its jurisdiction? Just how is that going to work?
Yeah, the design and the intent and the way we actually explained it in the code is that it is designed for local jurisdictions to adopt for their jurisdiction. Therefore, making whatever they adopt, whichever tier, be it Tier 1 or Tier 2,
right,
to be applied there. Now, whether...
so if I'm a developer and that jurisdiction has not developed Tier 1, but I want to construct according to the code, what can I say? Can I call it a Cal Green building?
Well, what you can call it, as with anything, you call it, if you want to say it's Title 24 compliant, Cal Green compliant, or anything else. I mean, if you've met the minimum codes, but as far as the intent is not, the code is not intended to be a marketing
Okay,
code.
But we think that we're already seeing marketing going on with Leeds and others.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
We're just wondering how that would operate if a developer met that and a municipality has not adopted anything yet, or any kind of mandatory tier.
Well, we establish a minimum, so it's not designed so that anybody could go out and develop to a tier, but there are plenty of optional items that we would hope that developers would go ahead and include as part of their process. Now, as far as a marketing position, I don't think it's intended to be marketing that way. And we don't control marketing, so right now anybody, I think, could call their building anything they wanted.
Thank you. Welcome, Senator Harman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The next question is, with the adoption of the Cal Green Code, local governments may still enforce and administer adopt ordinances, actually, that I believe that can be required even more stringent standards than Tier 1 or Tier 2 in their jurisdictions. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
So they can do more. And looking at what is the basis, can they use environmental conditions? Is that a sufficient basis in which to base more stringent standards? Can they do that? What kind of justification and do they need to do?
Well, it's no different than what they're doing now for the jurisdictions that are already doing that. And state law is specific about climatic, geological, and topographical. We did add to our Part 1 or our Chapter 1 regulations that environmental issues can be considered part of that process.
And do we know, are there local jurisdictions that have gone far beyond the Cal Green Code at this moment?
Yes, there are.
Good. Okay. And you mentioned also that there will be, this is just the beginning, that the next code cycle, I think, will be developed in 2013.
That'll be the next triennial code update, yes.
Any hints, anything that you see as which we can look forward to, at least discussions on, which might be included in the next go-around that we really are not touching now? Or
well, I think for us, I think one of the big issues out there is existing buildings. So as we can work towards that, I think we'd like to try to capture and create some standards that people can use for existing buildings to try to improve their carbon footprint. But Beyond that, I mean, we certainly want to focus on water, some of the key elements that are
So
important
right now,
to the
we're
state.
just talking about new construction, really, but you
Yes.
really want us to begin to look at any kind of enhancement or development of and maintenance of existing, and that might be at least a topic of discussion in 2013.
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions now? Thank you. With that, let's move on in the presentation to Kim Strange and Doug Hensel from the Department of Housing and Community Development and their Codes and Standards Division. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator Lowenthal.
And again, I want to thank HCD for all the work that you did on the implementation of the gray water standards. Thank you so much.
It's nice to be recognized by you, Senator.
It's nice that you did the work.
And the other committee members. How's that?
That's good.
Okay. I don't want to be repetitive and repeat what Mr. Walls has said, but I do want to thank you for having us here today and the opportunity to explain the Cal Green and its benefits. And as you can see from the literature we gave you ahead of time, we took a very pronged approach and tried to hit all of the main areas that do affect construction as well as residential housing so that we get our hand a little in every area and everyone gets a little used to it in order to come and change and evolve the actual way that building is done. And so that eventually someday we'll just naturally build this way and conserve these resources. But what we see down the road also, not only taking a look at existing housing, but we'd also like to expand our scope to include housing that's over 3 stories, which the code doesn't currently incorporate in it. So.
It does not now incorporate over 3 stories.
Correct.
So, yeah. So the MH, the multifamily housing program, multifamily affordable, none of that is really included in the code. Is that what you, over 3 stories?
Over 3 stories, yeah.
The retail down below.
Yeah.
A couple of floors up above.
Okay.
Okay. So, and
Is that going to, is that a statutory change or that it would
no,
be
not
needed
it's
to
just
do
part
that?
of the triennial will expand the actual code to include those occupancies.
So when are they going to do that? In 2013 is when you see that happening, Kim?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So what other changes do you see occurring?
What do you?
Or if you could gaze into your crystal ball as we
Yeah.
move forward, we're not asking you for definitive, this is what you've held off and you're not doing, but really, as we move in this direction, it's always helpful for us to hear if there are issues that were not completely resolved now that will be at least discussed in the future as you move with the next round of green building standards.
Additions, renovations.
Why don't you introduce yourself also,
Doug Hensel, Department of Housing and Community Development. Additions and renovations, as Kim mentioned, high-rise occupancies, that'd be occupancies over 3 stories. Continue to work with stakeholders. We've saved the comments that we've received. Typically, when we start a rulemaking, we'll go back through those comments and pull things out. And then continue to work with ARB and see if we can be of any assistance in their greenhouse gas reduction efforts.
Mm-hmm. Anything that you see as going to be the greatest difficulty that developers are going to incur as let's say we get out of this economic doldrums that we're in and we begin to really see an uptick in construction of residential? What do you think is going to be the most daunting challenge to the implementation of the green building standards? Or do you see that there is a challenge?
I think the biggest thing, the biggest service that we can provide to the construction industry now is the educational piece, and getting them up to speed on what the changes are. We've developed a document that has a comparison. Provided that to you, that here's the way you build it now, here's the requirements, and here's what the requirement is after January 1 of 2011. Mm-hmm. And I think they've been very supportive. The industry has been supportive. And I think just getting that word out, not only to the big builders, but the smaller builders as well.
Okay. Senator Huff.
Do we have any estimates what it adds to the cost of housing per square foot?
Not per square foot.
What metric then?
I can't remember the square foot model that we used, but the number was between $1,500 and $2,000 is the number.
But you don't know if that's based on a 1,000, 1,500, 2,000?
As I recall, it was 2,000 square feet.
2,000.
Not 100%.
Thank you.
You know, just for my own edification, when cities or counties adopt more stringent standards, can you give me some examples of where they've adopted that are more stringent than the existing building standards, the new Cal Green Code? Do we know where? Let's say there's what city? What are they doing that goes beyond where these states, and who is doing that? Do you have any idea? I'm sure somebody later on, when they get a chance, we can answer. So if you can't answer that, we're going to have
Cities are.
doing what?
You know, adopting the LEED Platinum.
The LEED Platinum, right.
Silver standards. Quite a few are. Calabasas just finished.
And are those more stringent than the new Cal Green standards? How so?
Someone who's probably in the audience can answer better than I, but one of the most interesting groups that's adopted stringent standards, the military bases in my district get grants from the Department of Defense, I believe. They've actually opened up new buildings. Their administrative headquarters are all green building standards. I think on the platinum level.
At a platinum level?
I can't be exact, but their administrative headquarters, for energy efficiency, it saves money, and there's a lot of federal grants that trying to lower the cost of military expenditures by being smarter in the use of energy efficiency. It's really quite interesting.
Oh, it will be, yeah. It'll be interesting when people also testify to hear where they see us going, and if are there ways in which they've either gone further or not as far as these. I see this.
I think LAC is offering some sort of credits, if you will, as far as prioritizing projects or exploring that.
Okay, yes.
Something to that. So, yes, there are some cities that have adopted the LEED and the various programs that has been discussed. But our program is not directly, I mean, it's kind of an apples to oranges type of comparison. We have things in our code that aren't necessarily part of LEED or that. Definitely if they go LEED Platinum or LEED Gold, those type of things, that is higher.
Higher standard.
I think a higher standard. But, you know, we're working closely with the City of LA, for example, right now. They are current, I think, ordinance is LEED certified, the intent of LEED certified. But they're looking at making changes. The City of Calabasas, which was mentioned, they recently adopted our Cal Green Code as one of the cities that have taken the current voluntary provisions and have adopted as mandatory. And City of Irvine has done as well. So, you know, it's hard to kind of clearly define, you know, what cities have done because they've all done different things. It's to say which ones have gone above and beyond. Ours also captures all buildings, so it starts at the smallest building and goes to the largest. Some of these programs don't really kick in until you hit, you know, a very large size building. So again, it's hard to really give a direct comparison.
Good. I'm sure there'll be some more input about that as people come up and address the committee about really what cities have done, where we're going, how does this compare to LEED's Platinum or Gold. You know, we'll hear that discussion and possibly some suggestions about what the next round might look like also. So if there are no more questions from the members of the committee, let's move on to our interested party feedback. Yeah, let's bring up, I'm going to ask to bring up 3 or 4 at a time that are in the interested party. Jose Mejia from the California State Council of Laborers, Matt Hargrove from the California Business Property Association, and Elizabeth Eccles from United States Green Building Council, Northern California chapter. If there's someone, okay, and let's just kind of start with this group. We don't have any questions. They're just, yeah. Now, kind of the overview of where we are now about the new adoption of green building standards and the Cal Green Code. What do you want to tell us as a committee?
Mr. Chairman, members, Jose Mejia, California State Council Laborers. You know, we've supported the Cal Green standards, obviously, and it's certainly a new direction, a new wave, and the fact that, of course, it's a new opportunity for jobs. The demand, the building industry, construction industry as a whole, will be making demands of all of us who work and support the industry. And we are now training. We are now, through apprenticeship training, as well as a lot of my colleagues in the trades, are moving towards that direction. We're very supportive of that. And I think it's very important to recognize, too, that I think that, as was mentioned earlier, you have a lot of municipalities and a lot of localities, obviously, who are now instituting their own. But the fact of the matter is that Cal Green was a step in the right direction. We're very supportive of that. Without taking any more time, I would like to go ahead and yield time to a consultant at the California State Council of Laborers and the Laborers Union as a whole that has more insight on this whole topic. He's a colleague and friend, and if I may, Mr. Chair, I'd like to go ahead and yield time to him.
Absolutely. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mejia, and thank you, Senator Lowenthal, Committee Chair, and fellow members.
And welcome, Senator DeSaulnier.
Pleasure to be here.
Just to tie into the comments that Mr. Mejia made, and just a very quick background, I was asked about a year ago to start to review the Cal Green process from both within the BSC development process and from the outside, looking at what the rest of the country was doing, and actually had spent some time conversing quite heavily with folks and with the laborers in Canada, since this is a process that they have developed and have implemented 3, 4, 5 years ago. And my ultimate review was to make a recommendation to the laborers to support Cal Green. And I think probably the most significant points, two of which you have brought up, Senator, and Mr. Mejia just brought up, are, I think, and you'll probably hear from Mr. Reamer and others, and that is a standard approach. Right now we have a variety of voluntary processes that are out there in approaching green building standards. With a minimal requirement such as Cal Green, what it does is it gives us an integrated process that every system of government within the state of California can implement. That gives our training programs an immediate opportunity to start to develop towards a standard of training, a standard of care. That is a significant piece, and I've noticed and compliment you, Senator, on your recognition of the builders and the interest that they have, because let's remember that in this day and age, builders are also the folks, because we live in a design-build society, are the folks that also work very closely with the design professionals. And it's that working relationship that it's in working with the local building departments that's integrated to making this project a success. I would also like to add that one of the other issues that was significant in our choice to support Cal Green was and I hate to do this, but it was something that came up yesterday, otherwise I would have had copies made. But the National Institute of Building Sciences released a report on building rating and certification in the U.S. building community last September. It's online at the NIBS report, NIBS site, nibs.org. And there were several issues that drew my attention that I spoke with several folks around the country, in particular attorneys that dealt with construction defect litigation. And it's the expectation of several of these voluntary design criteria that are out there that unfortunately, as I may share with you, there's a growing concern that design and contractor liability risks may arise if performance expectations are not realized in completed projects. The vast majority of insurance claims involve misrepresentation, miscommunication, and misunderstood expectations between owners and design and construction professionals. The question or the era of potential liability, as you raised earlier, because of this economy that we have, with the potential of putting people back to work, with the funding that we may see coming through green building projects, we don't need that potential risk of liability. With CalGreen, we in effect, in so many words, have what we would consider a safe harbor. If I had to look in my crystal ball for the next triennial adoption process, I would say that probably that $1,500 to $2,000 that it's out there, we'll start to see that number start to drop. As more people become more familiar with these processes, that dollar becomes absorbed, that $1,500 will become absorbed up into the project as other types of new technologies have in years past and won't even be a consideration.
That's great. Thank you. Any questions? Let's move on then to our next, Matt Hargrove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senators. I'm Matthew Hargrove with the California Business Properties Association. CBPA serves as a legislative and regulatory advocate for many commercial individual companies, as well as we are a representative for some national professional organizations, including the Building Owners and Managers Association of California, International Council of Shopping Centers, the California chapters of the Commercial Real Estate Development Association, and that's NAIOP of California. I want to put the CalGreen standards into context. Even before CalGreen passed, California was building the greenest buildings in the nation. Right now, on average, a building in California is 40% more energy efficient and emits a little less than half the greenhouse gases of your national average. So California's been doing a very good job. CalGreen's comprehensive regulations are only going to accelerate this reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, energy consumption, and water use, which is very important in CalGreen, the reduction of water usage. The commercial real estate industry has been very supportive of these regulations because they provide that clear statewide standards and consistency that we've been talking about. The number one question I've been getting from members and from reporters is, why does industry support these standards? And I'd like to get into that a little bit. The main reasons are that regulations that go through the Building Standards Commission must, under state law, be cost-effective and technologically feasible. That's extremely important for our industry. Because of both of these requirements and the consensus-based process which these codes were written, you have broad support for these codes, not only from industry but environmental groups and others out there. More to the point, however, of why does it make policy sense for industry to support CalGreen, I think it's very important that we have the author of AB 32 here, SB 375, which is the first law in the nation that connects greenhouse gases to land use. That's extremely important, and CalGreen is going to be able to help quantify how our industry meets our scoping plan requirements and how under the SB 375 programs, how we're going to be able to quantify the built environment reduction in greenhouse gases. Aside from that, our industry has had a long track record of working with the Energy Commission and the PUC and others on building codes and implementing them. The California Air Resources Board estimates that the mandatory provisions, just the mandatory provisions of CalGreen, is going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions the equivalent of 3 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per year come 2020. That savings provides one clear strategy under the scoping plan of AB 32 to help us meet our goals in the energy efficiency sector. And also, because the ARB has been so involved in CalGreen, they've been able to quantify greenhouse gas reductions, which means that CalGreen is going to help us calculate greenhouse gas impacts within your sustainable community strategies. So when all the groups out there get together and start writing those, they're going to be able to plug in CalGreen and figure out really what the land use and reduction in greenhouse gases is. But also, it's going to better help cities account for greenhouse gas impacts as they write their general plans. Many of you know there's a lot of lawsuits out there over cities' general plans and what they're doing to reduce greenhouse gases. CalGreen is going to help locals quantify that under their general plan, and we think that that's a huge help that the connection between BSC and the ARB has here. This clear statewide standard also provides for consistent standards across the state so that companies, especially the larger builders that are building in multiple jurisdictions, don't have different codes to have to build to. As you heard earlier, there's several cities that have gone above and beyond the code, which we think is absolutely fine. But what you end up getting there is some inconsistencies in the code. What that does is it makes it difficult for our companies to achieve economies of scale. So one thing we think that CalGreen will bring is some statewide consistency, even with those cities that choose to go above and beyond. It also means that local building officials are all training to one standard, which means it will help with better compliance and will help with statewide meeting the goals of CalGreen. Finally, and I'm wrapping up here, is the statewide consistency will also help with training and education for everyone involved in the process. On the builder side, we're going to be able to train everyone who's building buildings to the CalGreen standards, which is applicable throughout the state. Like with the existing building code provisions, CalGreen will be inspected by the locals, which you've already heard, the state building departments. We think that's a very good thing because that means you have the same administrative unit locally as doing the plan check as well as getting out there and inspecting it. And again, that's not to the exclusion of some of the third-party certification programs. We think that these things can and will work together. So lastly, I want to say as we come out of this downturn, the commercial real estate industry is going to help lead us out of this. We think that CalGreen is going to help us on a number of fronts, come out of this downturn and be able to build buildings in California that are also meeting some of the strict environmental goals that have come through this legislature. Two bills that have come through this committee that have been very helpful in this process is SB 1473, which was sponsored by industry and which is going to be a self-assessment on industry to provide education and training materials to everyone who needs to implement CalGreen. Extremely important, as well as AB 210 by Ms. Hayashi that was approved by this committee last year that absolutely clarified that locals can go above and beyond the state's minimum building code, and it doesn't tie it to CalGreen. It's anything. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention to this important matter, and am available for any questions.
Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Eccles, Director of the U.S. Green Building Council for Northern California, and I'm presenting this statement on behalf of USGBC National and the 8 California chapters of USGBC. With me are Jeremy Sigmund from our national office and John Zinner from USGBC Los Angeles. Chairman Lowenthal and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to participate today in this hearing and for your interest in the green building. USGBC is a national nonprofit representing nearly 20,000 corporate members, architects, engineers, entrepreneurs, and builders committed to a prosperous and sustainable future through cost-efficient and energy-saving green buildings. I want to acknowledge and thank the staff of the Building Standards Commission, the Department of Housing and Community Development, and other state agencies that put countless hours into developing the state's Green Building Standards Code. USGBC and its California chapters have been an active participant in the code development process. And while, of course, not all of our recommendations were adopted, we remain in support of the goals of the CalGreen standard. We also welcome the opportunity to work with CBSC, HCD, and others during this critical implementation phase, as well as any future updates to the code. CalGreen is an important step in raising the floor on green building standards. The establishment of a higher mandatory minimum also will make it significantly easier to continue to raise the bar on LEED. USGBC has held a long history of working to improve building codes because of the important role that they play in achieving the market transformation that our mission demands. The USGBC also worked closely with ASHRAE and ISNA to create the Code Intended Standard 189, which was launched at ASHRAE's annual meeting 2 weeks ago. We're also continuing to work with ICC on the International Green Construction Code and on landmark municipal code improvements. While we are pleased that California has raised the bar by improving the mandatory standards for the state, as you know, we've been on record with concerns about how the voluntary tiers will be effectively used and implemented. These concerns have been well documented in letters from USGBC National and the California chapters, so I will only summarize our main concern here, and that is that the attainment of Tier 1 and Tier 2 criteria may be erroneously viewed as an assurance that the project has met very meaningful certification procedures substantiating additional environmental standards. In addition, the code will need to be implemented with an adequate verification mechanism for the tier structure. We all will need to work together to ensure that building officials get the training and resources necessary to undertake their new responsibilities under CalGreen. Needless to say, we believe that that will be very challenging, particularly in the current economic climate. Clear, standardized definitions and protocols are needed. Otherwise, some measures could be interpreted differently by the various localities that adopt them, which would undermine the state's goal of providing uniform guidance for cities that want to go above the state minimum. Detailed compliance guidance providing standards and protocols to substantiate the performance claims for the local officials charged with enforcing the code could help to alleviate these issues. We have offered through USGBC National to provide technical expertise to assist in implementation as CSBSC sees fit. In addition to the points above, during implementation, our priorities also remain to ensure that buildings not be labeled as CalGreen or green simply because they meet the state's minimum legal requirements. CalGreen and the tiers become a program that allows voluntary, independently certified green building standards to play a distinct but complementary role to continue to drive innovation and transformation for the built environment. And finally, that the cities and counties continue to have the ability to adopt ordinances that best meet their local needs so long as they submit the required findings. Now, on this last point, I understand that it is the intent to continue to allow cities to adopt more stringent requirements. I just heard what Mr. Walls said. But we have heard from local officials that there is a great deal of confusion as to what CalGreen means for cities that have already adopted more stringent requirements or are planning to. And so as part of CBSC's educational and outreach efforts to cities, it would be helpful to clarify that localities can still choose more stringent standards if that's what they decide is best suited to their needs. We also recognize that the code will continue to evolve, and we look forward to working with CBSC and HCD staff to improve the code in its future iterations. We urge the CBSC to adopt the process revisions previously included in the final draft of CalGreen. This language will ensure that state agencies charged with protecting Californians' environment and public health, such as the California Energy Commission, ARB, Department of Water Resources, continue to have a seat at the table when future green building standards are under development, along with, of course, industry, stakeholders, environmental groups, and local government. Today, our common priority should be on appropriate and rigorous implementation of the code. To that end, we remain committed to ensuring the high environmental goals of CalGreen are advanced as quickly and as responsibly as possible. Thanks very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Question or two. As you point out, that this is really, and you complimented California for really raising the floor, having a standard now for a mandatory, really, standard now, and that you do acknowledge and recognize that cities and other can go far beyond or can go beyond that standard. There may be some need for greater clarity and greater communication so that they understand they're not being required just to do this, that they have greater options. This is just really the floor that we're talking. The question I have is, are we the first state to develop mandatory standards, and how do we compare to other states right now?
We are the first state to have a mandatory statewide green building standard, and California should definitely be congratulated for that. And so, as Matthew was pointing out earlier, California is ahead in terms of its green building standards and many other environmental standards, and we certainly are leading the country in a lot of ways.
Do you see anything that, as we move towards the next round in 2013, talking about this standard, the floor that should be at least in discussion now, or we should begin to think about, not that necessarily it will change, but where do we go to now that we've established this? What's the next round, and what ideas should we be thinking about? Again, as I pointed out when I first began, although there has been a plethora of legislation recently, this is still primarily done through the administrative process. Not to say that the legislation will not continue, but where do you see it leading as we move to the next, as we implement this? And obviously enforcement and understanding, to make, before we can talk about change, we have to make sure that we're actually living up to it right now. And so those are the issues that I'd really like to ask.
Right.
Where you see it going.
Definitely two great questions there. One being the implementation phase right now. And so there's a big opportunity and a big challenge that for both the mandatory and the voluntary measures to really work out how best to implement them, and particularly on the tiers where we've got a lot of performance measures. Those are, we fully support the performance measures in the tiers we pushed for them. But for example, if you want to be able to prove that a building is 30% above code, what does that mean? How does that break down? What type of protocols are you going to use? You don't want that to, first of all, you want that to be rigorous, and then secondly, you don't want that to be different in every city in the state that adopts a Tier 1 or Tier 2. So those are the challenges I see in terms of implementation, and we are certainly willing to help with any technical expertise we can provide as the CBSC sees fit to assist with that. And then to the second point about, okay, what about the future? The really big opportunity there, actually, as Dave Walls mentioned, is existing buildings. I mean, that is the
existing buildings.
The existing buildings. That is where the big opportunity is, particularly now when there's not a lot of new construction happening. If we can address the issue of existing buildings in California, you can really see some major improvements in terms of our AB 32 goals and a lot of other environmental goals.
Got it. Okay, we'll keep that in the back of our minds as we move forward. Existing buildings, existing infrastructure. How do we may be moving forward with new construction, but as was pointed out, that's only up to the third floor anyway. And so, there's issues around new construction too but especially the issue is how do we deal with the entire critical numbers of existing structures, and how do we get those involved also? Thank you. Thank you so much. Any members wish to raise? Okay, let's just kind of move forward. The next group, I have three. Sarah Yerkes, International Code Council. Is Scott Wetch here? Hello, Scott. And Kurt Kooknick from the American Institute of Architects. If the three of you could kind of come forward and shed some light on this issue. We're looking for light. And some water. And a parking space. But we've eliminated, but I'm not going to go there. Senator Huff has warned me not to raise that issue at all, and so I always listen to my dear friend. Please begin. You don't have to listen to this idle chatter behind the...
Good afternoon, Chairman, Senators. I am Sarah Yerkes. I'm the Senior Vice President of Government Relations for the International Code Council, and it is my responsibility to oversee the interaction of the organization with all 50 states and thousands of jurisdictions across the country that adopt and use the I-codes. The International Code Council is commonly known as ICC. It was founded in 1994 by organizations like ICBO, the International Conference of Code Officials, headquartered in Whittier. We maintain an office in Whittier with approximately 100 employees. And the mission of the organization, when it was consolidated, was to provide uniformity for building regulations, because architects and engineers and code officials felt that working with regional codes was counterproductive. It was very time-consuming and costly, and they wanted that uniformity, and that's why the organizations, the three legacy organizations, consolidated in 2003. But we still support some jurisdictions out there, believe it or not, still using legacy codes that go past 1997 and so forth. The codes are revised every 3 years. Right now, the most current edition is 2009. So today, and in this short period of time between 1999, when the first edition of the I-codes came out, and now all 50 states have adopted the I-codes. That means that these model codes serve as the basis for building and fire regulations used throughout the nation. They're also used by the federal agencies, State Department, Department of Defense, National Park Service, HUD, FEMA, U.S. Capitol, and also recognized internationally and used to construct in Saudi Arabia, Macau, Mexico. We helped Mexico develop its residential code. And so we're proud of the fact that the American codes and standards, and by that I mean codes that are developed by American standards developers like ICC, National Fire Protection Association, IAPMO, and others, are widely accepted internationally and nationally. Our recent experiences here in California have been wonderful. They've been tremendous, and I've been working now here in California for about 10 years. And I can tell you unequivocally that California has one of the most open and public processes to review and adopt codes. It has been a pleasure working with the California Building Standards Commission. It wasn't always this way. It is, I think the state is very fortunate to have individuals working for the state that are very committed to the public safety of the state, the residents of the state. I think that's heartwarming and a lot of integrity. And I respect the individuals here, particularly the executive director, Dave Walls, who's been wonderful to work with. I respect him a lot, and his staff from the state agencies. I think they have been great assets to the California Building Code development. I've worked with the state agencies and the coordinating council, and we've provided input. As the model code developer, we play an interesting role. We provide information without trying to influence the state on what it needs to do, because we believe at ICC that decisions to adapt the code to California is a matter of California deciding. It's your decision. And what happens then when the jurisdiction adopts the model codes is they will adapt them to their needs, and they're published as the California Construction Code, as the New York City Code, the Florida Code, and so forth. So what we do is provide that common code format for the jurisdictions to follow. And what that means is that an architect in California can go to New York or Florida or Louisiana and pick up the code of the state and know exactly where to go, because everything, the chapters, the format is the same across the country. We also believe very strongly that California adopting, the first state to adopt the state green code, really set the wheels moving, and we're learning here also by working with California. Green building is an issue that's gained a lot of steam over the past few years, and it's still in infancy. There's still a lot we're learning. We don't know much about it. I'm in an office, it's a Silver Lead building, and I'm personally learning as a tenant of that building how to behave in that building and whether the building is properly functioning and meeting all the energy efficiency ratings and so forth. So we're learning, and energy efficiency, conservation, sustainability are not going to go away. So we're excited about the future, and we welcome the opportunity to work with our strong partnership here in the state of California as the state moves forward with amending the code. The code will have to be amended as time goes on. That's what happens. Building, fire, plumbing, mechanical, technologies change, methodologies change. They need to be strengthened and improved, so they need to be in constant revision. The ICC used the California Green CalGreen as a resource document for the development of our International Green Construction Code. This is the first model code that's going to provide a regulatory framework for green construction. It will address new and existing construction. The code is now in its fifth draft, and the public edition is going to be rolled out March 15th for public comment. It's going to be available for the public to review and comment until the end of August, and then it will be put through the model code development process to make sure that it meets all the criteria of balance and consensus, and get the membership nationwide to weigh in on the code before it gets voted by the membership. I think I'll be glad to answer questions. I think I've said what I need to say. I believe that the process here in California has been working very well, and we cherish our relationship with the state. It's been a tremendous partnership. When the codes are adopted, we don't feel this is it. This is the end of the relationship, and now we're out of here. Thank you, California, for adopting our codes. We believe that it's an ongoing relationship where we work with the state, we provide support, and we work hand in hand in assisting with code interpretations or training, anything the state needs. So I appreciate your invitation to come here and speak to you, and on behalf of our CEO and our 50,000 members and 26 California chapters, I thank you for your time and consideration, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. It's always nice to hear doing something. With that, building upon that is
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Scott Wetsch on behalf of the California State Pipe Trades Council. I'm going to focus my comments primarily on the plumbing code. The council has long recognized the link between its profession and the public health and the environment. And we think it's important in these discussions to always remain mindful that because plumbing systems carry drinking water and dispose of sewage, these systems pose inherent public health risks and environmental water quality risks if not properly designed and installed. It's not too many years ago, we all recall the horrific scare that raced across the globe when we had the SARS epidemic. When the World Health Organization concluded its final report on the cause of SARS, it found definitively that it was caused by an inadequate and inefficient plumbing system in Hong Kong that created that outbreak. So it's a very serious issue. For this reason, the Council has long advocated for safe and reliable plumbing materials and methods that protect water quality and ensure the safe disposal of sewage. At the same time, the Council has a long history of supporting safe and effective water conservation provisions in the plumbing code, including water-efficient fixtures and appliances, and of course, close to the Chair's heart, the installation of gray water systems and the use of recycled water. The Council particularly supports the CalGreen Code, and this is the primary point that I want to leave with the committee. The Council supports the CalGreen Code adoption process because it ensures that California's water and energy efficiency goals are met within the model code process. And it's the model code process that ensures the primary responsibilities of the state are kept at the forefront, which is maintaining safe drinking water, protecting the public health, and ensuring reliable plumbing systems. It would have been easy for the legislature, perhaps, and the state to go down a different path and simply try to delegate through some secondhand process, the code shall comply with some independent lead standard, for instance. That's something that we've resisted because we believe, first of all, that would be an unconstitutional delegation of legislative authority, but also it would be an inappropriate delegation of the state's responsibility to have a process maintained by the state, overseen by the state, that ensures all of the issues that I covered recently. We thought that the process worked extremely well this year with the Commission inviting in all of the other state agencies that have input to bring to bear into the process without creating an ever-expanding code adoption process. The process is long enough. It takes 3 years to conclude, so we don't want to see that extended at all. So we think that for the first shot, this process worked very well, and we look forward in the next code cycle to even bring California standards even to a higher mark. So thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Lowenthal, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to present today to you. My name is Kurt Kooknick. I am the Director of Regulation and Practice for the American Institute of Architects California Council, and I'm here on behalf of 21,000 California licensed architects. It's no secret that AIA supports CalGreen. In fact, at the conclusion of one of the California Building Standards Commission hearings some years ago, it was Bob Raymer from CBIA and myself who were on testimony recommending to the Commission, in fact, that they form a sixth Code Advisory Committee, the Green Code Advisory Committee, so that we could get underway to bring us to this point today. It's been a very long process. It's been a good process. As Sarah Yerkes mentioned, it is an open, if not the most open, of public processes. And in fact, AIA California Council and, again, CBIA are the sponsors of AB 47 that brought this Building Standard Commission to you that you see today. So we're very proud of that process. It works. That having been said, in my conversations with Mark Stivers, the notion of what the architects like and dislike about CalGreen was asked, and I'd like to speak to that today. What we like about CalGreen is that it codifies what traditionally has been best practices for architects. It gives us a good baseline to require people to start from. As Dave Walls mentioned in the beginning of his testimony, is it perfect? No. But the beauty is, it is a code adoption cycle, and we can come back and take a second bite of the apple and make it better. Sarah Yerkes also mentioned that CalGreen is the basis of the International Green Construction Code. I am the AIA staff member in charge of AIA's responsibilities for the development of the IGCC, and I can tell you I'm very proud of that it is the base document. We are cutting edge. The rest of the country is looking to us to do these things that they seem to be having difficulty. And we should be very proud of what we've created. It's something that we can all look back on and say, good work. Moving forward, the things we dislike about it, well, I don't know what there is to dislike. Maybe in 3 years we can tell you. But again, we'll come back and we'll look at it through the code adoption cycle. We also talked about next steps. This is the critical one. This is the big one. Education. It's education of the design professionals, builders, contractors, and the owners. Because we've talked on a national level about meeting the requirements. In California, it's Tier 1, Tier 2. Well, if your building owner, when you're designing the project as an architect, scopes the project out and tells you, well, we're going to do some computer work here, and so it's some offices, and so you design it for that, and you say, all right, these are the criteria we're going to meet. And all of a sudden, the owner comes back in litigation and says, my building's not meeting the level that you said it would. So now you find yourself in court. Well, you go back and you look, and you find out that the owner turned this place into a server farm, and that's why the meter is running all the time. Or he's locked the doors open in the wintertime or the summertime, left the windows open, left the lights on, what have you. So owner education is key. Contractor education is key. Designer education is key. We can get there. There's plenty of resource available. And educating our members both California-wise on CalGreen and nationally on IGCC is something that we know and understand we're going to have to do. I guess if there was one dislike about it about this code is that, as many people have touched on, it did not focus on existing buildings. Existing buildings are probably the biggest wasters of energy simply because they were designed to a different time. However, in time we'll get there on those buildings as well, and I think that we'll all be better for that. There's some other areas where we'll struggle. In California, we use a term commissioning, and on the national level, we use compliance verification. Some people are concerned about energy coming from the source to the site, and they want to trace it all the way back to the source. Those are the issues we'll struggle with in the future. But we are on path, make no mistake. And in closing, AIA California Council supports the work of the Building Standards Commission. We have some very good collaterals in this process. They're all behind me. Every one of these folks who's participated in this process, ICC, IAPMO, CBIA, USGBC, StopWaste.org, every one of them brings something to this process. There's a part for all of us. There's enough work to go around. And thank you.
I'll be glad to come back.
Sarah, anytime. The next, I'd like to ask there are 4 more invited participants, interested party feedback. There's Victoria Rome from the Natural Resources Defense Council, Dan Cardoza of IAPMO, Bob Raymer from the California Building Industry Association, and Anthony Thomas, California Forestry Products Association. Welcome.
Thank you. Shall I go first?
You can go first, Victoria.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Victoria Rome with the Natural Resources Defense Council. Our organization has been following the development of the California Green Building Standards Code from the beginning, and we've asked for some modifications and improvements along the way. Many of our suggestions were incorporated and some were not. While there is still work to do, we believe the code is an important step forward in protecting California's environment and improving construction standards. The mandatory measures integrate environmental performance into the traditional building code and ensure that all new buildings, both commercial and residential, advance resource efficiency and promote occupant health. Positive measures in particular include the requirement for 20% reduction in indoor water use, especially the standards for faucets and shower heads, which aren't yet in place in any other state requirements. Also, submetering requirements for large commercial landscapes and for certain commercial buildings will help better measure water use. In addition, the code mandates diversion of 50% of construction waste, commissioning of buildings over 10,000 square feet, and bicycle and clean air vehicle parking for certain buildings. As I mentioned, there is still more work to be done, and we look forward to working with the BSC and HCD during the next phase. One area we'd like to explore is additional water conservation measures that would help save even more water, energy, and money. It is critical that the BSC continue its efforts to educate local governments and builders on the code. For Cal Green to have the most value, it needs to be clearly understood and consistently implemented and verified at the local level. We've heard repeatedly that this code is not intended to replace LEED, Build It Green, or other third-party certification programs. We share the view that this code can and should work in concert with other programs and that it is helping to raise the floor on green building standards. As the code is implemented, the state should support local governments that choose to go above and beyond state requirements. Finally, NRDC and Environmental Defense Fund have focused on ensuring that the process of developing the Green Building Standards Code is inclusive, open, and transparent for all who want to participate. We sponsored legislation that passed this committee last year, AB 828 by Assemblyman Liu, which would have ensured that the BSC and HCD consult with the state's environmental and health agencies, as well as environmental groups, builders, green building experts, and other interested parties. Despite broad support from many of the people who have testified and will testify here today, the bill was vetoed. And at the time, BSC and HCD had regulations pending that would have put in place most of the same requirements as AB 828. At the BSC's meeting in January, however, only the HCD regulations were adopted. Therefore, the collaborative public process that we feel is so important is only partially in place at this time. We hope this situation can be corrected at the next Commission meeting in April. want to thank you for holding this hearing today. And again, we look forward to working with you, the administration, and all the stakeholders as this moves forward.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senators. I'm Bob Raymer, Senior Engineer and Technical Director with the California Building Industry Association, and I also serve as the Chair for the Building Standards Commission's Green Building Code Advisory Committee. Before I get into my presentation, just to answer a few of the questions that you've raised, being present to the crosstalk for the last 3 years on this, it's clear that there's probably at least 6 areas that we're going to be addressing during the next, I would say, 2 updates of the Green Building Standards. Exterior water conservation. We already have some rather stringent indoor water conservation measures, but there's still plenty left to actually learn and then figure out how to do on exterior water conservation. There's also waste management and recycling. There's some very good local programs out there. We've got to figure out how to develop some uniformity to a statewide provision for waste management and recycling that can be implemented throughout the state. Also, as already been mentioned, high-rise residential structures, 4 stories or more, we definitely have to get into that. And quite frankly, we've got members in our organization that are looking forward to having some type of uniformity in those standards. We need to look at the Tier 1 and Tier 2 structure and in terms of enhancing those and perhaps providing a little bit more clarity to it. We also need to look into life cycle analysis. We have to start figuring out, much like the Energy Commission did back in the early 1980s, we have to start figuring out how to quantify the green benefits that are put here. It's very difficult to measure wood versus cement versus steel versus aluminum. We've got to try to crack that nut. A lot of information is already out there, and I suspect over the next 3 to 4 years we'll be working on that. Then, of course, lastly, the existing building stock. Just looking at residential alone, we've got 13.3 million units in the existing housing stock right now. That's single-family, multifamily. Given last year's number, we put a dent into that number by 0.3%. It was an abysmal construction year, but that's the current state of the economy. At this rate, we'll probably be impacting 5% of the overall housing stock over the next decade. So with that, I provided to each of you a handout. We don't need to go over this, so you don't have to read through 190 pages of code. We have summarized the mandatory residential provisions into a 2-page checklist and then an 8-page summary for your viewing pleasure later on. Now, to kind of kick things off, California has taken a quantum leap here. We have effectively gone from where a lot of states already are with voluntary green building guidelines. We've taken that quantum step to where we've adopted mandatory provisions into the body of our code. That is a huge step. I don't expect any state in the nation to follow us anytime soon. But the fact is, we do have a lot of states watching how this stuff gets implemented, and so it'll be very helpful to get advice from so many other people watching us to make sure they don't repeat any mistakes that we do. However, right now you've got about 10% of the jurisdictions throughout the state that have either a voluntary or mandatory program on the books. This is going to mainstream it to where 100% of all new residential buildings and 100% of all new commercial buildings starting January 2011 will be integrating mandatory residential and commercial green building provisions. Now, let's be clear, the adoption of these state regulations will not in any way preclude a local jurisdiction from adopting codes that go beyond. We made that very clear in AB 210. We already have over 24 jurisdictions. About 2/3 of those are in the Bay Area, the other third in Southern California, but they've already adopted mandatory green building standards, most for residential, but some for commercial as well. We also have another 24 that have adopted voluntary green building programs. They have to get their building standard adopted at local ordinance with a finding of fact. They have to file that paperwork with the Building Standards Commission. It is a very easy and non-costly process to go through. They don't need extensive legal review. All they have to do is get their paperwork filed with the Building Standards Commission. They're good to go. And so that should not change at all. The only thing they have to make sure they do is when they do adopt a local green building program, they have to make sure that it is at least as equivalent or more stringent than the state regs. That's it. So with that, it's pretty straightforward. That'll be a component of our training seminars that we'll be doing over the next 6 months. We will be covering the local modification of the state code provision. In terms of the future, as was already mentioned by 2 speakers, ongoing compliance training needs to be a huge focus. The Energy Commission back in the late 90s and early 2000s did a very good job of working with DOE and industry and the utilities and getting education and training out. But after the electrical deregulation problem, they focused almost all of their efforts on the development and adoption of new standards, very little about getting the training out into the field where the rubber meets the road. And that is a key component. If you don't do that, you can't expect your standards to get implemented well. It's like changing a speed limit, but not posting a sign or telling the highway patrol that the speed limit has changed. And so we have got to make education and training as important as development and adoption, and that'll be what we're working on in the coming years. To do that, we got SB 1473 passed. It provides some financing to the Building Standards Commission and HCD to help with these type of educational endeavors, primarily for green building construction. In terms of the public process, over the past 5 years, the code-related workload expected of both the state agencies and the public has increased dramatically. I would say it's probably increased by size, by sheer volume, by a 2-fold level. It's crushing. The process is kind of crushing in on itself. That is why we're sponsoring this year AB 1693, authored by Assemblymember Ma. This bill would switch California from a 12-month code adoption cycle established back in the early 1990s and move us to a more reasonable 18-month cycle. Now, quite frankly, we're kind of already there. The state tries to get it done in 12 months. For the last 2 updates of the code, we've effectively gone into an 18-month cycle. But sooner or later, somebody's going to sue over that. And more importantly for the public, it would be nice to be able to have BSC and HCD put up on the wall, here's our process. We're going to use this 6 months for the informal development. We're going to use this for the formal adoption process. We're going to use this for the publication and education. And the public could know 3-6 years in advance when certain things are going to be going on at the state level. Right now, it's not clear, and that needs to change so that we can all productively work together with each other. And lastly, in terms of Tier 2, I've been asked to speak just briefly on Senate Bill 375. There's a good chance that as ARB and others develop compliance scenarios for Senate Bill 375, regional greenhouse gas reduction, that a level of greenhouse gas reduction of 28.5% seems to be a number that ARB and others seem to be kind of focusing in on. Clearly, there is a direct correlation between energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reduction. The Tier 2 component of the green building standards, both residential and commercial, includes a 30% reduction in energy efficiency. So as we go forward, we're going to be fine-tuning the tiers, but certainly one possible use of Tier 2 down the road may be for, on a silver platter, effectively an expedited compliance with certain portions of Senate Bill 375. So with that, if you've got any questions about the content of the standards, I'd be glad to answer them.
Good. We'll come back to those questions, but let's listen to the rest of the speakers.
Good afternoon. Tom Enslow on behalf of IATMO. Dan Cardozo couldn't be here today. IATMO is the developer and publisher of the Uniform Plumbing and Mechanical Codes. The Uniform Plumbing and Mechanical Codes are the national model codes upon which California plumbing and mechanical codes are based. With more than 80 years of experience in code development, IATMO codes are utilized by around half the world's population. IATMO has been a leader in the green model code provisions, even way before the term green building was ever used. The IATMO codes, and by extension, the California Plumbing and Mechanical Codes, have long included provisions for water-efficient plumbing products, gray water and reclaimed water systems, indoor air quality requirements, and environmentally friendly refrigerants. And as a result, it is a bit of a misnomer to state that Cal Green is the first state green building code, because California has long incorporated green building practices into its plumbing and mechanical codes, not to mention, of course, its energy code. However, today we're at a juncture where everyone agrees that we need to take green building practices to another level, and that is why Cal Green Code serves such an important purpose. And the model code organizations, including IATMO and ICC, are working hand in hand with California to create national model green building codes that will both reflect what California is adopting and serve as a resource to California as it moves forward in the evolution of its Cal Green Code. For example, IAPMO has just published its first Green Plumbing and Mechanical Supplement, which just came out this past month. The Green Supplement is a separate document from the Uniform Plumbing and Mechanical Code and establishes requirements for green building and water efficiency applicable to plumbing and mechanical systems, as well as both hydronic and photovoltaic solar energy systems. The Green Plumbing and Mechanical Supplement serves as a repository for provisions that ultimately will be integrated into the uniform codes, much like the voluntary provisions in the Cal Green hopefully will ultimately end up in the California codes as mandatory provisions. The Green Plumbing Supplement will also serve as a resource for jurisdictions who wish to adopt more progressive standards, and because it provides green building standards and design guidelines, it provides guidance to designers and builders who wish to comply with LEED and other green building practices and want the design guidelines set forth. As with IAPMO's plumbing and mechanical codes, we're hopeful that IAPMO's Green Plumbing and Mechanical Supplement will serve as a valuable guide to California as it continues to develop and expand its Cal Green Code. And indeed, during the development of the most recent Cal Green standards, IAPMO was happy to share preliminary drafts of its Green Plumbing and Mechanical Supplement to the state agencies for them to review during their code development process. IAPMO believes that green building standards, such as those contained in Cal Green and IAPMO Green Plumbing and Mechanical Supplement, are a vital tool that is needed in addition to traditional green rating systems such as LEED and Build It Green. By incorporating green building practices into building standards, we ensure, first of all, an increased minimum sustainability provisions by raising the bar for all buildings, not just green buildings. The advantage of incorporating green building standards into traditional building standards is also that it creates a holistic approach to building standard development. It ensures that green building practices are safe and reliable, and that energy and water efficiency goals are met without circumventing the health, safety, performance, and general welfare requirements that are already in the codes. We want efficiency, but we also want safe plumbing, clean water, healthy air, and building components that last without requiring wasteful, frequent repairs or replacement. And we applaud the California Building Standards Commission and HCD and the other state agencies for taking such a holistic approach to green building standards, as demonstrated by the new Cal Green Code. And we look forward to assisting them as the state moves forward in the process.
Thank you very much, Tom. Finally, we have Anthony Thomas from the California Forestry Products Association. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anthony Thomas, representing the California Forestry Association. Somehow the word products got placed in there. Products is not a part of our association.
Just the California Forestry
Association. Yes, sir.
Let's get rid of the products.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Products are gone. All right. We're going to move products over to building industry.
There you go.
That's very
good.
Build
products, not homes.
They're building products.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are pleased that the Building Standards Commission has approved the first statewide green building code in Cal Green. Our industry had the opportunity to participate in the development of the code and provided input in several areas. We believe that the code represents a positive step, as many have testified prior to me, but we believe it's a positive step in ensuring that future construction will meet high standards of energy efficiency, planning and design, and materials conservation. The standard was developed using the governmental consensus process, a better approach that we feel than the adoption of a privately developed standard such as LEED. The code had originally provided a preference for materials harvested or manufactured. Again, the code had originally provided a preference for materials harvested or manufactured within 500 miles of the construction site. However, under that scenario, our industry pointed out that a project, for example, in San Diego under that scenario, could give preference for building products produced in Mexico over products grown and manufactured in the state of California. The Commission subsequently amended the code to say that there would be preference for products harvested or manufactured in California or within 500 miles of the project site. We appreciate that change and argue that for wood products, there's no more green place to produce lumber than in California under our state's stringent forest practice rules. The Commission also adopted our recommendation for moisture content in lumber that is consistent with the rest of the California building codes, which is 19% moisture content. We note that, as Mr. Raymer pointed out, that life cycle assessment is an option in the code for jurisdictions to consider. However, we feel that this should eventually be more of a mandatory provision. The LCA approach gives a true cradle-to-grave analysis of the overall environmental impact of producing various building materials. It is only when we know the results of an LCA that we can actually decide which are the most environmentally preferable products. The biggest issue for the Forex products industry, however, was not completed in this version of the code, forest certification. We participated in meetings and hearings to try to arrive at a consensus that all major forest certification programs should be recognized in the code. Although many agreed with this approach, some opposed it and wanted a more limited recognition of only one forest certification scheme. That view, however, fails to recognize the fact that 90% of the world's forests are not certified. The fight then is over the remaining 10%. It makes no sense to pick winners and losers within those forests that are in fact certified. Further, this approach would give a preference for wood products produced in distant places such as China, Russia, Indonesia, and Brazil over products that are produced in California. The building code should accept wood from those forests that are certified or simply from California forests. LEED only recognizes the Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC, but counts FSC wood from anywhere, including those countries that were mentioned. They are saying that FSC wood from Russia is better than Sustainable Forestry Initiative certified wood, or SFI wood, in California. The state should not get into that debate and should be recognized and should recognize all of the major certification systems. We think that the Commission should revisit this particular issue and recognize all of the major forest certification programs, including, but not limited to, Forest Stewardship Council, Sustainable Forest Initiative, Tree Farm, and Canadian Standards Association. In closing, we're more than happy that the Commission adopted this landmark code, and we feel that this process was open, and input generally reasoned. There's no doubt the Commission will continue to refine the code as we move forward, and we'll be pleased to participate within that process. And thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. It's been very interesting. You know, there are a number of things that stick out, but one does the most. I mean, we've talked about the need for education and training. That's really clear. We're hearing it doesn't pay to do all this if people do not know what's required and what the training is. We know that there's issues to be dealt with in terms of water conservation and waste management, recycling, high-rise residential, life cycle analysis. These are all things that, as this landmark legislation or regulation really, or building standards really move forward in the future, we'll have to address. But there's one issue that I haven't mentioned here that I've heard over and over again, and that's many people here have highlighted the need to address existing buildings. That's really what I'm hearing. But given that building standards only apply to new construction, how do we deal with existing buildings through the building codes? I mean, how are we going to get to existing buildings? Bob?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The Energy Commission has already been adopting a few provisions in its energy updates in 2005 and 2008. For one thing, when you go to change out an air conditioner or heater in an old home, you now have to get the ducts tested to make sure that the ducts aren't leaking. And believe me, the homes built back in the 60s and 70s, we found that there could have leakage rates in excess of 75%, meaning that only 1/4 of the cool air goes from the air conditioner to the room where you want it. That's a terrible waste, and it's also a strain on our peak load capacity. The problem that we have here is, although that's been adopted into the energy regs, it's also created an unintended incentive for some contractors to go underground and not pull permits as they do the bidding process. It's not uncommon to see a $3,000 to $4,000 differential from one contractor to another for air conditioning and heater changeouts because one does the duct testing, the other one does not. So that'll be something that we have to work with the Energy Commission and the Contractor State License Board on. Certainly, as tenant improvements, particularly with the commercial industry, goes forward, as long as there's some type of cohesive and uniform process that we work out with the Building Owners and Managers Association, there's a great deal that can be done in the existing commercial buildings. And they want to do it. For one thing, the payback in the commercial industry is very fast, and that's a good incentive for them. So I don't anticipate that being quite the huge problem. Residential is more problematic, but even then, as you go about doing appliance changeouts, as you go about doing additions, alterations, and repairs, the CEC already has provisions on the books for those additions, alterations, and repairs. There's nothing stopping the Building Standards Commission or HCD from simply using that as perhaps a framework to look at future additions. So there are ways to go about doing it. Yeah.
Does anyone else wish to address that issue? Are there other folks that want to address the committee? Well, if not, I'm going to, unless other members wish to say so, I'm going to have to leave in just a minute, and I want to thank everybody who participated in today's hearing. I feel we have a better understanding of where the state is, where the state intends to go. I like hearing those compliments that we are doing something right here in California. We are doing something very right in California. We don't hear that too often. While I appreciate, and it's been pointed out, we've already identified areas such as residential, existing buildings, height, waste management, water conservation. There are lots of places where we need to go. I think it's real clear to us that the floor has been raised for the sustainability of new buildings. It's real clear. I think everyone, no matter what part they had to in this hearing, all said that, and it was really pleasing. I appreciate the Building Standards Commissions to clarify that cities and counties may adopt more stringent green building standards, and that environmental conditions are included within the requirements for amendments to be based on climatic, geological, or topographical conditions. But we may need in the future some kind of legislative clarification for that. I don't know exactly yet, but that may be important. And then finally, I think that the 2010 Cal Green Code is just a beginning. I know this code is going to evolve over time. Everyone has said that this code will be evolving over time. I just look forward to the future efforts to continue the greening of construction in California. And with that, Senator Huff, is there anything that you'd like to say?
Well, interesting meeting. I would just be mindful of the costs. I understand, there are costs to be saved by having efficient, materials and strategies. We already have a very unaffordable housing problem in California. It's as affordable now as it has been a long time, but for the wrong reasons.
For the wrong reasons.
But as we start ramping up, we do have a housing crisis. So it's just that balance that we have to maintain, that it makes sense for all those involved.
I think that I don't recall who mentioned that the cost now in terms of $1,500 to $2,000, that they see that cost coming down but I think we should be very mindful and respectful of the fact that we are trying to promote construction in California. We want green construction, but we're hurting as a state. And so
HCD did a great job of bringing that cost down during the development of these standards. I mean, at one time we were looking at probably a $4,000 increase.
Right. That's what's so nice to hear, the consensus that has come up from both the industry, the building industry, environmental community, that forestry, that we are moving forward, and this was a great first step. Senator Kehoe?
I'm fine. Thank you for the information. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.